Hi everyone, this is Chaz, and this is the video journal for Saturday, June 30th, 2012. This video journal is inspired by a question posed by Holly Owen Deckard, a woman I've known since I was 9 years old in 4th grade at Hay Edwards Elementary School, and she wanted to know if I've ever really talked about why David and I broke up. And the quick answer is no, I haven't, because the simple fact of the matter is I'm not entirely sure why we broke up. But first off, let's clear one thing up. We didn't break up. David chose to end the relationship. I didn't have any say in the matter. It's not like we sat down and we mutually agreed the relationship had run its course and that it was time for us to part ways. Because if that had happened, I would not be in the emotional and mental crisis that I'm in. Because I would have sat down, thought about it, and agreed that this relationship was over and that it was time to move on, but that wasn't the case. This was not a mutual breakup. This was David ending the relationship. And as for why, I can only speculate. David had said over the course of about the last 2 years, that there was this growing discontentment within him, starting about April or May of 2010. It was around that time that David made a couple of new friends, and I think that he got to see what an unfettered and single life had to offer, of not having to answer to anyone or take anyone else's feelings or opinions or desires into consideration, that these single people could just do what they wanted when they wanted and not have to take anyone else into consideration, that they had a circle of friends for support and for fun and for socializing, but their personal lives were individual, that they didn't have to consider anyone else. And I think that over the last 2 years, these single friends that David really started to kind of, I guess, envy the life that these people had. The ability to go off on long bike rides or camping trips or vacations or other trips on the spur of the moment. You know, with David and I as a couple, things had to be planned out. We couldn't just take off to Chicago, on a whim. We couldn't just, fly to San Francisco for a weekend. We couldn't just go on a camping trip, decide to pack the car up, on Friday night and go camping. Things had to be planned. Things had to be arranged. It's kind of the way I am. I'm a planner. I'm not a on the cusp kind of guy. And this desire of David's to have this individualistic lifestyle kind of led David to become a little on the selfish side, in my opinion. Well, obviously, because one is an individual. One does tend to be rather selfish. You put yourself, and I don't mean selfish as in mine. I mean selfish as in putting yourself above all else, putting your individuality, yourself above your partner, above your relationship, above anything else. And so David became kind of selfish in that regard, and he started to really kind of become inconsiderate when it came to me. A lot of times, David had these new interests that he wanted to pursue, be it rugby or camping or biking or hiking, and he would go off and he would do these things, and he would it would take a lot of time to do these activities, and that's a bit of a problem for me because of a couple of reasons. First off, we only had the one car. So when David would go off for rugby practice, or he would go off on a camping trip, or he would go off on a bike ride, that would mean that I would be housebound during that time that he was gone. So I would ask, because I don't like being housebound all the time, I would ask, the question, when are you going to be home? Because that way I would know when he was, when to expect him home, and that way I would know when to have dinner ready, or if we were going out that night, when we'd go out to eat, or when he would be home, so that I'm not housebound any longer. Because we live in the St. Louis area, and although St. Louis does have a public transportation system, it pretty much sucks. And in Belleville, it sucks even harder. So without a car, there's really not a whole lot that can be done. There's very little that is within walking distance of where I live. I mean, there's a couple of parks, but they're like small parks. There's a convenience store and maybe one restaurant that I could probably get to, but there isn't much else that's really walkable. The library might be, the post office might be, but movie theaters, no, museums, that kind of stuff, not really within walking distance. So when David would go out on these trips and leave me home housebound, I'd have the computer, I'd have TV, I'd have internet, I'd have books to read, but I would want to know when David was coming home. And because he was entering or starting this really selfish aspect of his phase, or of his personality, he would often tell me when he was going to be home. Like he'd go on a bike ride. Let's say he went on a bike ride. I'd ask him when he'd be home. He'd say 2 o'clock. Well, more often than not, the time that he told me that he would be home was not the time that he was home. He was usually, at minimum, half an hour to 45 minutes late getting home from the time when he told me he would be home. Sometimes as late as 4 or 5 hours. One instance, he didn't come home at all at night, one night. Of course, that was after we'd technically broken up, but still, I was housebound for, a long time when he did that. So, like the bike ride, he told me he'd be home at 2 o'clock. And this did actually happen. He went for a bike ride with his friends Dave and Tony. And he told me he'd be home by 2 o'clock. Well, at 4:30 he still hadn't gotten home. And so I had tried calling him to find out where he was, if he was going to be late. And I don't mean that he had to have a curfew, but when you tell your partner that you're going to be home at 2 o'clock and it's 4:30 and you're still not home, a phone call is nice to let the person know that you're going to be late. So I had tried calling him. I wasn't getting through. When I finally got through, it was now 2.5 hours after he said he was going to be home. I assumed that he would probably be on his way home. Maybe he left his phone in the car instead of having it with him on the bike ride, which is why he didn't answer the phone. So when he finally did answer the phone, now 2.5 hours late getting home, and I find out that no, he's not on his way home. He's only just now reached the halfway point of the bike trail that they're on. I got upset. You're 2.5 hours late getting home, and now you're telling me that you're only halfway through the bike ride, which means that you're going to be gone at least another 2 hours, leaving me housebound even longer. And, there was just a lack of consideration there, which I probably irritated him because, his single friends don't have to take that into consideration. They can go on a nice bike ride, and when they get home, they get home. But, none of his friends had situations like ours where we only had the one vehicle. So these new friends of David took my calling him and asking him when he was going to be home and then getting upset when he was late. They tried to convince David that I was being controlling and abusive. And I've really got to say that if calling someone who's 2.5 hours late getting home and getting upset when you find out it's going to be still another 2 hours before they get home is being controlling and abusive, then those people need to do some volunteer work at a battered women's shelter or a domestic violence shelter to see what real abuse looks like, because that's not abuse. That's lack of consideration and being upset that your feelings aren't being taken into consideration. So that's pretty much why our relationship ended. David decided that he wanted to do things that were uniquely him, and that didn't involve being a part of a couple. And when his couplehood infringed upon his individuality, he began to resent the couplehood and ultimately decided to end the couplehood so he could focus on his individuality. I can't really fault him, although I still wish he could have found a way, we could have figured out a way for him to be an individual and still maintain our relationship. But that didn't happen. So I don't want this to sound like I'm doing David bashing. Um, I'm only presuming exactly what was going on. I did a lot of things, or tried very hard to accommodate David's desire for individual activities. Um, Granted, I may have done it grumblingly, but rugby or the bike rides or whatever, um, there were very few things that David wanted to do that I flat out said no to. Um, you know, I don't. In fact, I can't think of anything that David said that he wanted to go do that I said no, don't go do this. And even if I did say no, he would go and do it anyway. Um, so that's basically it. Lack of discontent in the relationship, a lack of consideration, a selfish phase. I hope it's a phase. That's why our relationship ended. So I hope that answers your questions. If anyone else has any other questions that they want answers to, and David, if you're watching this and you have something that you want to add, if anything I've said is wrong, then by all means, let me know, because I'm just guessing as to why the relationship ended. It wasn't like we had a knockdown, drag-out fight, or you were cheating on me, although that's a whole nother issue. So that's why the relationship ended. So this is Chaz signing off. I just want to remind you all to take care of yourselves and each other. Not meaning to be channeling Jerry Springer here, but it is a good sentiment. So that's answering Holly Owen's question, why the relationship ended, as best as I'm able to answer it. Thank you all for watching. Feel free to leave comments, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.